Villette by Charlotte Brontë, Chapter 39. Old and New Acquaintance. Fascinated as by a basilisk with 3 heads, I could not leave this clique. The ground near them seemed to hold my feet. The canopy of entwined trees held out shadow. The night whispered a pledge of protection, and an officious lamp flashed just one beam to show me an obscure, safe seat, and then vanished. Let me now briefly tell the reader all that, during the past dark fortnight, I have been silently gathering from rumour respecting the origin and the object of Monsieur Emanuel's departure. The tale is short and not new. Its alpha is Mammon, and its omega interest. If Madame Walravens was hideous as a Hindu idol, she seemed also to possess, in the estimation of these her votaries, an idol's consequence. The fact was, she had been rich, very rich, and though for the present without the command of money, she was likely one day to be rich again. At Basse-Terre in Guadeloupe she possessed a large estate, received in dowry on her marriage 60 years ago, sequestered since her husband's failure, but now, it was supposed, cleared of claim, and, if duly looked after by a competent agent of integrity, considered capable of being made, in a few years, largely productive. Père Silas took an interest in this prospective improvement for the sake of religion and the church, whereof Magliore Walravens was a devout daughter. Madame Beck, distantly related to the hunchback, and knowing her to be without family of her own, had long brooded over contingencies with a mother's calculating forethought, and harshly treated as she was by Madame Walravens, never ceased to court her for interest's sake. Madame Beck and the priest were thus, for money reasons, equally and sincerely interested in the nursing of the West Indian estate. But the distance was great, and the climate hazardous. The competent and upright agent wanted must be a devoted man. Just such a man had Madame Walravens retained for 20 years in her service, blighting his life and then living on him like an old fungus. Such a man had Père Silas trained, taught, and bound to him by the ties of gratitude, habit, and belief. Such a man Madame Beck knew, and could in some measure influence. "My pupil," said Père Silas, "if he remains in Europe, runs risk of apostasy, for he has become entangled with a heretic." Madame Beck made also her private comment, and preferred in her own breast her secret reason for desiring expatriation. The thing she could not obtain, she desired not another to win; rather would she destroy it. As to Madame Walravens, she wanted her money and her land, and knew Paul, if he liked, could make the best and faithfulest steward. So the 3 self-seekers banded and beset the one unselfish. They reasoned, they appealed, they implored. On his mercy they cast themselves. Into his hands they confidingly thrust their interests. They asked but 2 or 3 years of devotion. After that, he should live for himself. One of the number, perhaps, wished that in the meantime he might die. No living being ever humbly laid his advantage at Monsieur Emanuel's feet, or confidingly put it into his hands, that he spurned the trust, or repulsed the repository. What might be his private pain or inward reluctance to leave Europe, what his calculations for his own future, none asked, or knew, or reported. All this was a blank to me. His conferences with his confessor I might guess. The part duty and religion were made to play in the persuasions used, I might conjecture. He was gone, and had made no sign. There my knowledge closed. With my head bent, and my forehead resting on my hands, I sat amidst grouped tree stems and branching brushwood. Whatever talk passed amongst my neighbours I might hear if I would. I was near enough, but for some reason there was scarce motive to attend. They gossiped about the dresses, the music, the illuminations, the fine night. I listened to hear them say, "It is calm weather for his voyage. The Antigua, his ship, will sail prosperously." No such remark fell. Neither the Antigua, nor her course, nor her passenger were named. Perhaps the light chat scarcely interested old Madame Walravens more than it did me. She appeared restless, turning her head now to this side, now to that, looking through the trees and among the crowd, as if expectant of an arrival and impatient of delay. "Où sont-ils? Pourquoi ne viennent-ils?" I heard her mutter more than once. And at last, as if determined to have an answer to her question, which hitherto none seemed to mind, she spoke aloud this phrase, a phrase brief enough, simple enough, but it sent a shock through me. "Messieurs et mesdames," said she, "où donc est Justine Marie?" Justine Marie? What was this? Justine Marie, the dead nun? Where was she? Why, in her grave, Madame Walravens. What can you want with her? You shall go to her, but she shall not come to you. Thus I should have answered, had the response laid with me. But nobody seemed to be of my mind. Nobody seemed surprised, startled, or at a loss. The quietest commonplace answer met the strange, the dead disturbing, the witch of Ender query of the hunchback. "Justine Marie," said one, "is coming. She is in the kiosk. She will be here presently." Out of this question and reply sprang a change in the chat. Chat it still remained, easy, desultory, familiar gossip. Hint, allusion, comment went round the circle, but all so broken, so dependent on references to persons not named, or circumstances not defined, that listen as intently as I would, and I did listen now with a fated interest, I could make out no more than that some scheme was on foot, in which this ghostly Justine Marie, dead or alive, was concerned. This family junta seemed grasping at her somehow, for some reason. There seemed question of a marriage, of a fortune, for whom I could not quite make out, perhaps for Victor Kent, perhaps for Joseph Emmanuel. Both were bachelors. Once I thought the hints and jests rained upon a fair-haired foreigner of the party, whom they called Heinrich Müller. Amidst all the badinage, Madame Walravens still obtruded from time to time hoarse, cross-grained speeches, her impatience being diverted only by an implacable surveillance of Désirée, who could not stir, but the old woman menaced her with her staff. "La voilà!" suddenly cried one of the gentlemen. "Voilà Justine Marie qui arrive!" This moment was for me peculiar. I called to memory the pictured nun on the panel. Present to my mind was the sad love story. I saw in thought the vision of the garret, the apparition of the alley, the strange birth of the berceau. I underwent a presentiment of discovery, a strong conviction of coming disclosure. Ah, when imagination once runs riot, where do we stop? What winter tree so bare and branchless, what wayside hedge-munching animal so humble, that fancy, a passing cloud, and a struggling moonbeam, will not clothe it in spirituality, and make of it a phantom? With solemn force pressed upon my heart, the expectation of mystery breaking up. Hitherto had I seen this spectre only through a glass darkly. Now was I to behold it face to face. I leaned forward. I looked. "She comes!" cried Joseph Emmanuel. The circle opened, as if opening to admit a new and welcome member. At this instant a torch chanced to be carried past. Its blaze aided the pale moon in doing justice to the crisis, in lighting to perfection the dénouement pressing on. Surely those near me must have felt some little of the anxiety I felt, in degree so unmeted. Of that group the coolest must have held his breath for a time. As for me, my life stood still. It is over. The moment and the nun are come. The crisis and the revelation are passed by. The flambeau glares within a yard, held up in a park-keeper's hand. Its long, eager tongue of flame almost licks the figure of the expected, there, where she stands full in my sight. What is she like? What does she wear? How does she look? Who is she? There are many masks in the park to-night, and as the hour wears late, so strange a feeling of revelry and mystery begins to spread abroad, that scarce would you discredit me, reader, were I to say that she is like the nun of the attic, that she wears black skirts and white head-clothes, that she looks the resurrection of the flesh, and that she is a risen ghost. All falsities, all figments. We will not deal in this gear. Let us be honest and cut, as heretofore, from the homely web of truth. Homely, though, is an ill-chosen word. What I see is not precisely homely. A girl of Villette stands there, a girl fresh from her pensionnat. She is very comely, with the beauty indigenous to this country. She looks well nourished, fair, and fat of flesh. Her cheeks are round, her eyes good, her hair abundant. She is handsomely dressed. She is not alone. Her escort consists of 3 persons, 2 being elderly. These she addresses as mon oncle and ma tante. She laughs, she chats, good-humoured, buxom and blooming. She looks at all points the bourgeois belle. So much for Justine Marie. So much for ghosts and mysteries. Not that this last was solved. This girl certainly is not my nun. What I saw in the garret and the garden must have been taller by a span. We have looked at the city belle. We have cursorily glanced at the respectable old uncle and aunt. Have we a stray glance to give to the 3rd member of this company? Can we spare him a moment's notice? We ought to distinguish him so far, reader. He has claims on us. We do not now meet him for the first time. I clasped my hands very hard, and I drew my breath very deep. I held in the cry. I devoured the ejaculation. I forbade the start. I spoke and I stirred no more than a stone. But I knew what I looked on. Through the dimness left in my eyes by many nights' weeping, I knew him. They said he was to sail by the Antigua. Madame Beck said so. She lied, or she had uttered what was once truth and failed to contradict it when it became false. The Antigua was gone, and there stood Paul Emanuel. Was I glad? A huge load left me. Was it a fact to warrant joy? I know not. Ask first what were the circumstances attendant upon this respite. How far did this delay concern me? Were there not those whom it might touch more nearly? After all, who may this young girl, this Justine Marie be? Not a stranger, reader. She is known to me by sight. She visits at the Rue Fossette. She is often of Madame Beck's Sunday parties. She is a relation of both the Becks and the Walravens. She derives her baptismal name from the sainted nun who would have been her aunt had she lived. Her patronymic is Sauveur. She is an heiress and an orphan, and Monsieur Emmanuel is her guardian, some say her godfather. The family junta wish this heiress to be married to one of their band. Which is it? Vital question. Which is it? I felt very glad now that the drug administered in the sweet draught had filled me with a possession which made bed and chamber intolerable. I always, through my whole life, liked to penetrate to the real truth. I like seeking the goddess in her temple, and handling the veil, and daring the dread glance. O Titaness among deities, the covered outline of thine aspect sickens often through its uncertainty. But define to us one trait, show us one lineament, clear in awful sincerity. We may gasp in untold terror, but with that gasp we drink in a breath of thy divinity. Our heart shakes, its currents sway like rivers lifted by earthquake, but we have swallowed strength. To see and know the worst is to take from fear her main advantage. The Walravens' party, augmented in numbers, now became very gay. The gentlemen fetched refreshments from the kiosk. All sat down on the turf under the trees. They drank healths and sentiments. They laughed, they jested. Monsieur Emmanuel underwent some raillery, half good-humoured, half, I thought, malicious, especially on Madame Beck's part. I soon gathered that his voyage had been temporarily deferred of his own will, without the concurrence, even against the advice, of his friends. He had let the Antigua go, and had taken his berth in the Paul et Virginie, appointed to sail a fortnight later. It was his reason for this resolve which they teased him to assign, and which he would only vaguely indicate as the settlement of a little piece of business which he had set his heart upon. What was this business? Nobody knew. Yes, there was one who seemed partly, at least, in his confidence. A meaning look passed between him and Justine Marie. "La petite va m'aider, n'est-ce pas?" said he. The answer was prompt enough, God knows. "Mais oui, je vous aiderai de tout mon cœur. Vous ferez de moi tout ce que vous voudrez, mon parrain." And this dear parrain took her hand and lifted it to his grateful lips. Upon which demonstration, I saw the light-complexioned young Teuton, Heinrich Müller, grow restless, as if he did not like it. He even grumbled a few words, whereat Monsieur Emanuel actually laughed in his face, and with the ruthless triumph of the assured conqueror, he drew his ward nearer to him. Monsieur Emanuel was indeed very joyous that night. He seemed not one whit subdued by the change of scene and action impending. He was the true life of the party, a little despotic perhaps, determined to be chief in mirth as well as in labour, yet from moment to moment proving indisputably his right of leadership. He was the wittiest word, the pleasantest anecdote, the frankest laugh. Restlessly active, after his manner, he multiplied himself to wait on all. But oh, I saw which was his favourite. I saw at whose feet he lay on the turf. I saw whom he folded carefully from the night air, whom he tended, watched, and cherished as the apple of his eye. Still, hint and raillery flew thick, and still I gathered that while Monsieur Paul should be absent, working for others, these others, not quite ungrateful, would guard for him the treasure he left in Europe. Let him bring them an Indian fortune, they would give him in return a young bride and a rich inheritance. As for the saintly consecration, the vow of constancy, that was forgotten. The blooming and charming present prevailed over the past, and, at length, his nun was indeed buried. Thus it must be. The revelation was indeed come. Presentiment had not been mistaken in her impulse. There is a kind of presentiment which never is mistaken. It was I who had for a moment miscalculated. Not seeing the true bearing of the oracle, I had thought she muttered a vision when, in truth, her prediction touched reality. I might have paused longer upon what I saw. I might have deliberated ere I drew inferences. Some, perhaps, would have held the premises doubtful, the proofs insufficient. Some slow sceptics would have incredulously examined ere they conclusively accepted the project of a marriage between a poor and unselfish man of 40 and his wealthy ward of 18. But far from me such shifts and palliatives, far from me such temporary evasion of the actual, such coward fleeing from the dread, the swift-footed, the all-overtaking fact, such feeble suspense of submission to her the sole sovereign, such paltering and faltering resistance to the power whose errand is to march conquering and to conquer, such traitor defection from the truth. No, I hastened to accept the whole plan. I extended my grasp and took it all in. I gathered it to me with a sort of rage of haste, and folded it round me, as the soldier struck on the field folds his colours about his breast. I invoked conviction to nail upon me the certainty, abhorred while embraced, to fix it with the strongest spikes her strongest strokes could drive, and when the iron had entered well my soul, I stood up, as I thought, renovated. In my infatuation I said, "Truth, you are a good mistress to your faithful servants. While a lie pressed me, how I suffered! Even when the falsehood was still sweet, still flattering to the fancy and warm to the feelings, it wasted me with hourly torment. The persuasion that affection was won could not be divorced from the dread that, by another turn of the wheel, it might be lost. Truth stripped away falsehood and flattery and expectancy, and here I stand free. Nothing remained now but to take my freedom to my chamber, to carry it with me to my bed, and see what I could make of it. The play was not yet indeed quite played out. I might have waited and watched longer that love scene under the trees, that sylvan courtship. Had there been nothing of love in the demonstration, my fancy in this hour was so generous, so creative, she could have modelled for it the most salient lineaments, and given it the deepest life and highest colour of passion. But I would not look. I had fixed my resolve, but I would not violate my nature. And then, something tore me so cruelly under my shawl, something so dug into my side, a vulture so strong in beak and talon, I must be alone to grapple with it. I think I never felt jealousy till now. This was not like enduring the endearments of Dr. John and Paulina, against which, while I sealed my eyes and my ears, while I withdrew thence my thoughts, my sense of harmony still acknowledged in it a charm. This was an outrage. The love born of beauty was not mine. I had nothing in common with it. I could not dare to meddle with it. But another love, venturing diffidently into life after long acquaintance, furnace tried by pain, stamped by constancy, consolidated by affection's pure and durable alloy, submitted by intellect to intellect's own tests, and finally wrought up by his process to his own unflawed completeness, this love that laughed at passion, his fast frenzies, and his hot and hurried extinction, in this love I had a vested interest, and whatever tended either to its culture or to its destruction, I could not view impassively. I turned from the group of trees and the merry company in its shade. Midnight was long past. The concert was over. The crowds were thinning. I followed the ebb. Leaving the radiant park and well-lit Haute Ville, still well lit, this seems it was to be a nuit blanche in Villette, I sought the dim lower quarter. Dim I should not say, for the beauty of moonlight, forgotten in the park, here once more flowed in upon perception. High she rode, and calm and stainlessly she shone. The music and the mirth of the fête, the fire and bright hues of those lamps had outdone and outshone her for an hour. But now, again, her glory and her silence triumphed. The rival lamps were dying. She held her course like a white fate. Drum, trumpet, bugle had uttered their clangour, and were forgotten. With pencil rays she wrote on heaven and on earth records for archives everlasting. She and those stars seemed to me at once the types and witnesses of truth all regnant. The night sky lit her reign. Like its slow-wheeling progress advanced her victory, an onward movement which has been, and is, and will be, from eternity to eternity. These oil-twinkling streets are very still. I like them for their lowliness and peace. Homeward-bound burghers pass me now and then, but these companies are pedestrians, make little noise, and are soon gone. So well do I love Villette under her present aspect, not willingly would I re-enter under a roof, but that I am bent on pursuing my strange adventure to a successful close, and quietly regaining my bed in the great dormitory before Madame Beck comes home. Only one street lies between me and the Rue Fossette. As I enter it for the first time, the sound of a carriage tears up the deep peace of this quarter. It comes this way, comes very fast. How loud sounds its rattle on the paved path! The street is narrow, and I keep carefully to the causeway. The carriage thunders past, but what do I see, or fancy I see, as it rushes by? Surely something white fluttered from that window. Surely a hand waved a handkerchief. Was that signal meant for me? Am I known? Who would recognize me? That is not Monsieur de Bassompierre's carriage, nor Mrs. Bretton's. And besides, neither the autocratie nor the Château of La Terrasse lies in that direction. Well, I have no time for conjecture. I must hurry home. Gaining the Rue Fossette, reaching the pensionnat, all there was still. No fiacre had arrived with Madame and Désirée. I had left the great door ajar. Should I find it thus? Perhaps the wind or some other accident may have thrown it to with sufficient force to start the spring bolt. In that case, hopeless became admission. My adventure must issue in catastrophe. I lightly pushed the heavy leaf. Would it yield? Yes. As soundless, as unresisting, as if some propitious genius had waited on a sesame charm in the vestibule within. Entering with bated breath, quietly making all fast, shoelessly mounting the staircase, I sought the dormitory and reached my couch. I reached it, and once more drew a free inspiration. The next moment I almost shrieked. Almost, but not quite, thank heavens. Throughout the dormitory, throughout the house, there reigned at this hour the stillness of death. All slept, and in such hush it seemed that none dreamed. Stretched on the 19 beds lay 19 forms, at full length and motionless. On mine, the 20th couch, nothing ought to have lain. I had left it void, and void should have found it. What then do I see between the half-drawn curtains? What dark usurping shape, supine, long, and strange? Is it a robber who has made his way through the open street door and lies there in wait? It looks very black. I think it looks not human. Can it be a wandering dog that has come in from the street and crept and nestled hither? Will it spring? Will it leap out if I approach? Approach I must. Courage! One step. My head reeled, for by the faint night lamp I saw stretched on my bed the old phantom, the nun. A cry at this moment might have ruined me. Be the spectacle what it might, I could afford neither consternation, scream, nor swoon. Besides, I was not overcome. Tempered by late incidents, my nerves disdained hysteria. Warm from illuminations and music and thronging thousands, thoroughly lashed up by a new scourge, I defied spectra. In a moment, without exclamation, I had rushed on the haunted couch. Nothing leaped out or sprung or stirred. All the movement was mine. So was all the life, the reality, the substance, the force, as my instinct felt. I tore her up, the incubus. I held her on high, the goblin. I shook her loose, the mystery. And down she fell, down all round me, down in shreds and fragments, and I trode upon her. Here again, behold the branchless tree, the unstabled Rosinante, the film of cloud, the flicker of moonshine. The long nun proved a long bolster dressed in a long black stole, and artfully invested with a white veil. The garments, in very truth, strange as it may seem, were genuine nuns' garments, and by some hand they had been disposed with a view to illusion. Whence came these vestments? Who contrived this artifice? These questions still remained. To the head bandage was pinned a slip of paper. It bore in pencil these mocking words: "The nun of the attic bequeaths to Lucy Snowe her wardrobe. She will be seen in the Rue Fossette no more." And what and who was she that had haunted me? She I had actually seen 3 times. Not a woman of my acquaintance had the stature of that ghost. She was not of female height. Not to any man I knew could the machination for a moment be attributed. Still mystified beyond expression, but as thoroughly, as suddenly relieved from all sense of the spectral and unearthly, scorning also to wear out my brain with the fret of a trivial though insoluble riddle, I just bundled together stole, veil, and bandages, thrust them beneath my pillow, lay down, listened till I heard the wheels of Madame's home-returning fiacre, then turned, and worn out by many nights' vigils, conquered too perhaps by the now reaching narcotic, I deeply slept. This is the end of Chapter 39, Old and New Acquaintance, read by Tora in Yellowstone National Park, October 2006. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. To learn more or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Villette by Charlotte Brontë. Chapter 40. The Happy Pair. The day succeeding this remarkable midsummer night proved no common day. I do not mean that it brought signs in heaven above or portents on the earth beneath. Nor do I allude to meteorological phenomena, to storm, flood, or whirlwind. On the contrary, the sun rose jocund with a July face. Morning decked her beauty with rubies, and so filled her lap with roses that they fell from her in showers, making her path blush. The hours woke fresh as nymphs, and emptying on the early hills their dew vials, they stepped out dismantled of vapour. Shadowless, azure, and glorious, they led the sun's steeds on a burning and unclouded course. In short, it was as fine a day as the finest summer could boast. But I doubt whether I was not the sole inhabitant of the Rue Fossette who cared or remembered to note this pleasant fact. Another thought busied all other heads, a thought, indeed, which had its share in my meditations. But this master consideration, not possessing for me so entire a novelty, so overwhelming a suddenness, especially so dense a mystery as it offered to the majority of my co-speculators thereon, left me somewhat more open than the rest to any collateral observation or impression. Still, while walking in the garden, feeling the sunshine, and marking the blooming and growing plants, I pondered the same subject the whole house discussed. What subject? Merely this. When matins came to be said, there was a place vacant in the first rank of boarders. When breakfast was served, there remained a coffee cup unclaimed. When the housemaid made the beds, she found in one a bolster laid lengthwise, clad in a cap and nightgown. And when Ginevra Fanshawe's music mistress came early, as usual, to give the morning lesson, that accomplished and promising young person, her pupil, failed utterly to be forthcoming. High and low was Miss Fanshawe sought, through length and breadth was the house ransacked. Vainly. Not a trace, not an indication, not so much as a scrap of a billet rewarded the search. The nymph was vanished, engulfed in the past night, like a shooting star swallowed up by darkness. Deep was the dismay of the surveillant teachers, deeper the horror of the defaulting directress. Never have I seen Madame Beck so pale or so appalled. Here was a blow struck at her tender part, her weak side. Here was damage done to her interest. How, too, had the untoward event happened? By what outlet had the fugitive taken wing? Not a casement was found unfastened, not a pane of glass broken. All the doors were bolted secure. Never to this day has Madame Beck obtained satisfaction on this point, nor indeed has anybody else concerned, save and excepting one, Lucy Snowe, who could not forget how, to facilitate a certain enterprise, a certain great door had been drawn softly to its lintel, closed indeed, but neither bolted nor secure. The thundering carriage and pair encountered were now likewise recalled, as well as that puzzling sight, the waved handkerchief. From these premises, and one or two others, inaccessible to any but myself, I could draw but one inference. It was a case of elopement. Morally certain on this head, and seeing Madame Beck's profound embarrassment, I at last communicated my conviction. Having alluded to M. de Hamal's suit, I found, as I expected, that Madame Beck was perfectly au fait to that affair. She had long since discussed it with Mrs. Cholmondeley, and laid her own responsibility in the business on that lady's shoulder. To Mrs. Cholmondeley and M. Bassompierre she now had recourse. We found that the Hôtel Crécy was already alive to what had happened. Ginevra had written to her cousin Paulina, vaguely signifying hymeneal intentions. Communications had been received from the family of de Hamel. M. de Bassompierre was on the track of the fugitives. He overtook them too late. In the course of the week, the post brought me a note. I may as well transcribe it. It contains explanation on more than one point. Dear old Tim, short for Timon. I am off, you see, gone like a shot. Alfred and I intended to be married in this way almost from the first. We never meant to be spliced in the humdrum way of other people. Alfred has too much spirit for that, and so have I, Dieu merci. Do you know, Alfred, who used to call you the dragon, has seen so much of you during the last few months that he begins to feel quite friendly towards you. He hopes you won't miss him now that he has gone. He begs to apologize for any little trouble he may have given you. He is afraid he rather inconvenienced you once when he came upon you in the grenier, just as you were reading a letter seemingly of the most special interest. But he could not resist the temptation to give you a start. You appeared so wonderfully taken up with your correspondent. En revanche, he says you once frightened him by rushing in for a dress or shawl or some other chiffon at the moment when he had struck a light and was going to take a quiet whiff of his cigar while waiting for me. Do you begin to comprehend by this time that Monsieur le Comte de Hamel was the nun of the attic, and that he came to see your humble servant? I will tell you how he managed it. You know he has the entrée of the Athénée, where 2 or 3 of his nephews, the sons of his eldest sister, Madame de Melcy, are students. You know the court of the Athénée is on the other side of the high wall bounding your walk, the Allée Défendue. Alfred can climb as well as he can dance or fence. His amusement was to make the escalade of our pensionnat by mounting, first the wall, then, by the aid of that high tree overspreading the Grand Berceau, and resting some of its boughs on the roof of the lower buildings of our premises, he managed to scale the first classe and the grande salle. One night, by the way, he fell out of this tree, tore down some of the branches, nearly broke his own neck, and after all, in running away, got a terrible fright, and was nearly caught by two people, Madame Beck and Monsieur Emmanuel, he thinks, walking in the alley. From the grande salle, the ascent is not difficult to the highest block of the building, finishing in the great garret. The skylight, you know, is, day and night, left half open for air. By the skylight he entered. Nearly a year ago I chanced to tell him our legend of the nun. That suggested his romantic idea of the spectral disguise, which I think you must allow he has cleverly carried out. But for the nun's black gown and white veil, he would have been caught again and again, both by you and that tiger Jesuit, Monsieur Paul. He thinks you both capital ghost-seers and very brave. What I wonder at is rather your secretiveness than your courage. How could you endure the visitations of that long spectre, time after time, without crying out, telling everybody, and rousing the whole house and neighbourhood? Oh, and how did you like the nun as a bedfellow? I dressed her up. Didn't I do well? Did you shriek when you saw her? I should have gone mad, but then you have such nerves, real ironed and bend leather. I believe you feel nothing. You haven't the same sensitiveness that a person of my constitution has. You seem to me insensible both to pain and fear and grief. You are a real old Diogenes. Well, dear grandmother, are you not mightily angry at my moonlight flitting and runaway match? I assure you it is excellent fun, and I did it partly to spite that minx Paulina and that bear Dr. John, to show them that, with all their airs, I could get married as well as they. Monsieur de Bassompierre was at first in a strange fume with Alfred. He threatened a prosecution for détournement de mineur, and I know not what. He was so abominably in earnest that I found myself forced to do a little bit of the melodramatic, to go down on my knees, sob, cry, drench 3 pocket handkerchiefs. Of course, mon oncle soon gave in. Indeed, where was the use of making a fuss? I am married, and that's all about it. He still says our marriage is not legal because I am not of age, forsooth, as if that made any difference. But I am just as married as if I were 100. However, we are to be married again, and I am to have a trousseau, and Mrs. Cholmondeley is going to superintendent, and there are some hopes that Monsieur de Bassompierre will give me a decent portion, which will be very convenient, as dear Alfred has nothing but his nobility, native and hereditary, and his pay. I only wish uncle would do things unconditionally, in a generous, gentlemanlike fashion. He is so disagreeable as to make the dowry depend upon Alfred's giving his written promise that he will never touch cards or dice from the day it is paid down. They accuse my angel of a tendency to play. I don't know anything about that, but I do know he is a dear, adorable creature. I cannot sufficiently extol the genius with which de Hamel managed our flight. How clever in him to select the night of the fête, when Madame, for he knows her habits, as he said, would infallibly be absent at the concert in the park. I suppose you must have gone with her. I watched you rise and leave the dormitory about 11 o'clock. How you returned alone, and on foot, I cannot conjecture. That surely was you we met in the narrow old Rue de Saint-Jean. Did you see me wave my handkerchief from the carriage window? Adieu! Rejoice in my good luck! Congratulate me on my supreme happiness, and believe me, dear cynic and misanthrope, yours, in the best of health and spirits, Ginevra Laura de Hamel née Fanshawe. P.S. Remember, I am a countess now. Papa, Mamma, and the girls at home will be delighted to hear that. My daughter the countess, my sister the countess. Bravo! Sounds better than Mrs. John Bretton, eh? In winding up Miss Fanshawe's memoirs, the reader will no doubt expect to hear that she came finally to bitter expiation of her youthful levities. Of course, a large share of suffering lies in reserve for her future. A few words will embody my farther knowledge respecting her. I saw her towards the close of her honeymoon. She called on Madame Beck and sent for me into the salon. She rushed into my arms laughing. She looked very blooming and beautiful. Her curls were longer, her cheeks rosier than ever, her white bonnet and her Flanders veil, her orange flowers and her bride's dress, became her mightily. "I have got my portion!" she cried at once. Ginevra ever stuck to the substantial. I have always thought there was a good trading element in her composition, much as she scorned the bourgeoise. And Uncle de Bassompierre is quite reconciled. I don't mind his calling Alfred a nincompoop. That's only his coarse Scotch breeding. And I do believe Paulina envies me, and Dr. John is wild with jealousy, fit to blow his brains out, and I'm so happy. I really think I've hardly anything left to wish for, unless it be a carriage and an hotel. And oh, I must introduce you to mon mari. Alfred, come here." And Alfred appeared from the inner salon, where he was talking to Madame Beck, receiving the blended felicitations and reprimands of that lady. I was presented under my various names, the Dragon, Diogenes, and Timon. The young colonel was very polite. He made me a prettily turned, neatly worded apology, about the ghost visits, etc., concluding with saying that the best excuse for all his iniquities stood there, pointing to his bride. And then the bride sent him back to Madame Beck, and she took me to herself, and proceeded literally to suffocate me with her unrestrained spirits, her girlish, giddy, wild nonsense. She showed me her ring exultingly. She called herself Madame la Comtesse de Hamel, and asked how it sounded a score of times. I said very little. I gave her only the crust and rind of my nature. No matter, she expected of me nothing better. She knew me too well to look for compliments. My dry gibes pleased her well enough, and the more impassible and prosaic my mien, the more merrily she laughed. Soon after his marriage, M. de Hamel was persuaded to leave the army as the surest way of weaning him from certain unprofitable associates and habits. A post of attaché was procured for him, and he and his young wife went abroad. I thought she would forget me now, but she did not. For many years she kept up a capricious, fitful sort of correspondence. During the first year or two, it was only of herself and Alfred she wrote. Then Alfred faded in the background. Herself and a certain newcomer prevailed. One Alfred Fanshawe de Bassompierre de Hamel began to reign in his father's stead. There were great boastings about this personage, extravagant amplifications upon miracles of precocity, mixed with vehement objurgations against the phlegmatic incredulity with which I received them. I didn't know what it was to be a mother. Unfeeling thing that I was, the sensibilities of the maternal heart were Greek and Hebrew to me, and so on. In due course of nature, this young gentleman took his degrees in teething, measles, whooping cough. That was a terrible time for me. The mamma's letters became a perfect shout of affliction. Never woman was so put upon by calamity. Never human being stood in such need of sympathy. I was frightened at first, and wrote back pathetically. But I soon found out there was more cry than wool in the business, and relapsed into my natural cruel insensibility. As to the youthful sufferer, he weathered each storm like a hero. 5 times was that youth in articulo mortis, and 5 times did he miraculously revive. In the course of years there arose ominous murmurings against Alfred I. M. de Bassompierre had to be appealed to. Debts had to be paid, some of them of that dismal and dingy order called debts of honour. Ignoble plaints and difficulties became frequent. Under every cloud, no matter what its nature, Ginevra, as of old, called out lustily for sympathy and aid. She had no notion of meeting any distress single-handed. In some shape, from some quarter or other, she was pretty sure to obtain her will, and so she got on, fighting the battle of life by proxy, and, on the whole, suffering as little as any human being I have ever known. This is the end of Chapter 40, The Happy Pair, read by Tora in Yellowstone National Park, October 2006.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Susan Denny, Denton, Texas. Villette by Charlotte Brontë. Chapter 41. Faubourg Clotilde. Must I, ere I close, render some account of that freedom and renovation which I won on the fête night? Must I tell how I and the 2 stalwart companions I brought home from the illuminated park bore the test of intimate acquaintance? I tried them the very next day. They had boasted their strength loudly when they reclaimed me from love and its bondage. But upon my demanding deeds, not words, some evidence of better comfort, some experience, of a relieved life, freedom excused himself, as for the present impoverished and disabled, to assist. And renovation never spoke. He had died in the night suddenly. I had nothing left for it then but to trust secretly that conjecture might have hurried me too fast and too far, to sustain the oppressive hour by reminders of the distorting and discolouring magic of jealousy. After a short and vain struggle, I found myself brought back captive to the old rack of suspense, tied down and strained anew. Shall I yet see him before he goes? Will he bear me in mind? Does he purpose to come? Will this day, will the next hour bring him? Or must I again essay that corroding pain of long attent, that rude agony of rupture at the close, that mute, mortal wrench, which in at once uprooting hope and doubt shakes life? While the hand that does the violence cannot be caressed to pity, because absence interposes her barrier. It was the feast of the Assumption. No school was held. The boarders and teachers, after attending Mass in the morning, were gone a long walk into the country to take their goûter or afternoon meal at some farmhouse. I did not go with them, for now but 2 days remained ere the Paul et Virginie must sail, and I was clinging to my last chance, as the living waif of a wreck clings to his last raft or cable. There was some joiner's work to do in the first classe, some bench or desk to repair. Holidays were often turned to account for the performance of these operations, which could not be executed when the rooms were filled with pupils. As I sat solitary, purposing to adjourn to the garden and leave the coast clear, but too listless to fulfil my own intent, I heard the workmen coming. Foreign artisans and servants do everything by couples. I believe it would take 2 Labassecourien carpenters to drive a nail. While tying on my bonnet, which had hitherto hung by its ribbons from my idle hand, I vaguely and momentarily wondered to hear the step of but one ouvrier. I noted, too, as captives in dungeons find sometimes dreary leisure to note the merest trifles, that this man wore shoes, and not sabots. I concluded that it must be the master carpenter, coming to inspect before he sent his journeyman. I threw round me my scarf. He advanced. He opened the door. My back was towards it. I felt a little thrill, a curious sensation, too quick and transient to be analysed. I turned. I stood in the supposed master artisan's presence. Looking towards the doorway, I saw it filled with a figure, and my eyes printed upon my brain the picture of Monsieur Paul. Hundreds of prayers with which we weary heaven bring to the suppliant no fulfilment. Once haply in life, one golden gift falls prone in the lap, one boon full and bright, perfect from fruition's mint. Monsieur Emmanuel wore the dress in which he probably purposed to travel, a surtout guarded with velvet. I thought him prepared for instant departure, and yet I had understood that 2 days were yet to run before the ship sailed. He looked well and cheerful. He looked kind and benign. He came in with eagerness. He was close to me in 1 second. He was all amity. It might be his bridegroom mood which thus brightened him. Whatever the cause, I could not meet his sunshine with cloud. If this were my last moment with him, I would not waste it in forced, unnatural distance. I loved him well, too well not to smite out of my path even jealousy herself, when she would have obstructed a kind farewell. A cordial word from his lips, or a gentle look from his eyes, would do me good for all the span of life that remained to me. It would be comfort in the last strait of loneliness. I would take it. I would taste the elixir, and pride should not spill the cup. The interview would be short, of course. He would say to me just what he had said to each of the assembled pupils. He would take and hold my hand 2 minutes. He would touch my cheek with his lips for the first, last, only time, and then no more. Then, indeed, the final parting. Then the wide separation, the great gulf I could not pass to go to him, across which happily he would not glance to remember me. He took my hand in one of his. With the other he put back my bonnet. He looked into my face. His luminous smile went out. His lips expressed something almost like the wordless language of a mother who finds a child greatly and unexpectedly changed, broken with illness or worn out by want. A check supervened. "Paul! Paul!" said a woman's hurried voice behind. "Paul, come into the salon. I have yet a great many things to say to you. Conversation for the whole day. And so has Victor. And Joseph is here. Come, Paul, come to your friends." Madame Beck, brought to the spot by vigilance or an inscrutable instinct, pressed so near she almost thrust herself between me and Monsieur Emanuel. "Come, Paul!" she reiterated, her eyes grazing me with its hard ray like a steel stylet. She pushed against her kinsman. I thought he receded. I thought he would go. Pierced deeper than I could endure, made now to feel what defied suppression, I cried, "My heart will break!" What I felt seemed literal heartbreak, but the seal of another fountain yielded under the strain. One breath from Monsieur Paul, the whisper, "Trust me," lifted a load, opened an outlet. With many a deep sob, with thrilling, with icy shiver, with strong trembling, and yet with relief, I wept. "Leave her to me. It is a crisis. I will give her a cordial, and it will pass," said the calm Madame Beck. To be left to her and her cordial seemed to me something like being left to the poisoner and her bowl. When Monsieur Paul answered deeply, harshly, and briefly, "Laissez-moi," in the grim sound I felt a music strange, strong, but life-giving. "Laissez-moi," he repeated, his nostrils opening, and his facial muscles all quivering as he spoke. "But this will never do," said Madame with sternness. More sternly rejoined her kinsman, "Sortez d'ici." "I will send for Père Silas. On the spot I will send for him," she threatened pertinaciously. "Femme!" cried the Professor, not now in his deep tones, but in his highest and most excited key. "Femme, sortez à l'instant!" He was roused, and I loved him in his wrath with a passion beyond what I had yet felt. "What you do is wrong," pursued Madame. "It is an act characteristic of men of your unreliable, imaginative temperament, a step impulsive, injudicious, inconsistent, a proceeding vexatious, and not estimable in the view of persons of steadier and more resolute character." "You know not what I have of steady and resolute in me," said he, "but you shall see. The event shall teach you. Modeste," he continued less fiercely, "be gentle, be pitying, be a woman. Look at this poor face and relent. You know I am your friend, and the friend of your friends. In spite of your taunts, you well and deeply know I may be trusted. Of sacrificing myself I made no difficulty, but my heart is pained by what I see. It must have and give solace. Leave me." This time in the "leave me" there was an intonation so bitter and so imperative, I wondered that even Madame Beck herself could for one moment delay obedience. But she stood firm. She gazed upon him dauntless. She met his eye, forbidding and fixed as stone. She was opening her lips to retort. I saw over all M. Paul's face a quick rising light and fire. I can hardly tell how he managed the movement. It did not seem violent. It kept the form of courtesy. He gave his hand. It scarce touched her, I thought. She ran. She whirled from the room. She was gone, and the door shut in 1 second. The flash of passion was all over very soon. He smiled as he told me to wipe my eyes. He waited quietly till I was calm, dropping from time to time a stilling, solacing word. Ere long I sat beside him once more myself, reassured, not desperate, nor yet desolate, not friendless, not hopeless, not sick of life and seeking death. "It made you very sad, then, to lose your friend?" said he. "It kills me to be forgotten, monsieur," I said. "All these weary days I have not heard from you one word, and I was crushed with the possibility, growing to certainty that you would depart without saying farewell." "Must I tell you what I told Modeste Beck, that you do not know me? Must I show and teach you my character? You will have proof that I can be a firm friend. Without clear proof, this hand will not lie still in mine. It will not trust my shoulder as a safe stay? Good. The proof is ready. I come to justify myself. Say anything, teach anything, prove anything, monsieur. I can listen now." "Then, in the first place, you must go out with me a good distance into the town. I came on purpose to fetch you." Without questioning his meaning, or sounding his plan, or offering the semblance of an objection, I retied my bonnet. I was ready. The route he took was by the boulevard. He several times made me sit down on the seats stationed under the lime trees. He did not ask if I was tired, but looked, and drew his own conclusions. "All these weary days," said he, repeating my words, with a gentle, kindly mimicry of my voice and foreign accent, not new from his lips, and of which the playful banter never wounded, not even when coupled, as it often was, with the assertion that however I might write his language, I spoke, and always should speak it imperfectly and hesitatingly. "All these weary days I have not for 1 hour forgotten you." Faithful women err in this, that they think themselves the sole faithful of God's creatures. On a very fervent and living truth to myself, I too, till lately scarce dared count from any quarter, but look at me. I lifted my happy eyes, they were happy now, or they would have been no interpreters of my heart. "Well," said he, after some second scrutiny, "there is no denying that signature. Constancy wrote it. Her pen is of iron. Was the record painful?" "Severely painful," I said, with truth. "Withdraw her hand, monsieur. I can bear its inscribing force no more." "Elle est toute pâle," said he, speaking to himself. "Cette figure-là me fait mal." "Ah, I am not pleasant to look at?" I could not help saying this. The words came unbidden. I never remember the time when I had not a haunting dread of what might be the degree of my outward deficiency. This dread pressed me at the moment with special force. A great softness passed upon his countenance. His violet eyes grew suffused and glistening under their deep Spanish lashes. He started up. "Let us walk on." "Do I displease your eyes much?" I took courage to urge. The point had its vital import for me. He stopped and gave me a short, strong answer, an answer which silenced, subdued, yet profoundly satisfied. Ever after that I knew what I was for him, and what I might be for the rest of the world. I ceased painfully to care. Was it weak to lay so much stress on an opinion about appearance? I fear it might be. I fear it was. But in that case I must avow no light share of weakness. I must own great fear of displeasing, a strong wish moderately to please M. Paul. Whither we rambled I scarce knew. Our walk was long, yet seemed short. The path was pleasant, the day lovely. M. Emanuel talked of his voyage. He thought of staying away 3 years. On his return from Guadeloupe, he looked forward to release from liabilities and a clear course. And what did I purpose doing in the interval of his absence, he asked. I had talked once, he reminded me, of trying to be independent and keeping a little school of my own. Had I dropped the idea? Indeed, I had not. I was doing my best to save what would enable me to put it in practice. He did not like leaving me in the Rue Fossette. He feared I should miss him there too much. I should feel desolate. I should grow sad. This was certain, but I promised to do my best to endure. "Still," said he, speaking low, "there is another objection to your present residence. I should wish to write to you sometimes. It would not be well to have any uncertainty about the safe transmission of letters. And in the Rue Fossette, in short, our Catholic discipline in certain matters, though justifiable and expedient, might possibly, under peculiar circumstances, become liable to misapplication, perhaps abuse." "But if you write," said I must have your letters, and I will have them. 10 directors, 20 directresses shall not keep them from me. I am a Protestant. I will not bear that kind of discipline. Monsieur, I will not." "Doucement, doucement," rejoined he. "We will contrive a plan. We have our resources. Soyez tranquille." So speaking, he paused. We were now returning from the long walk. We had reached the middle of a clean faubourg where the houses were small but looked pleasant. It was before the white doorstep of a very neat abode that M. Paul had halted. "I call here," said he. He did not knock, but taking from his pocket a key, he opened and entered at once. Ushering me in, he shut the door behind us. No servant appeared. The vestibule was small, like the house, but freshly and tastefully painted. Its vista closed in a French window with vines trained about the panes, tendrils and green leaves kissing the glass. Silence reigned in this dwelling. Opening an inner door, M. Paul disclosed a parlour or salon, very tiny, but I thought very pretty. Its delicate walls were tinged like a blush, its floor was waxed. A square of brilliant carpet covered its centre. Its small round table shone like the mirror over its hearth. There was a little couch, a little chiffonière, the half-open crimson silk door of which showed porcelain on the shelves. There was a French clock, a lamp. There were ornaments in biscuit china. The recess of the single ample window was filled with a green stand, bearing 3 green flower pots, each filled with a fine plant glowing in bloom. In one corner appeared a guéridon with a marble top, and upon it a work-box and a glass filled with violets in water. The lattice of this room was open. The outer air breathing through gave freshness. The sweet violets lent fragrance. "Pretty, pretty place," said I. M. Paul smiled to see me so pleased. "Must we sit down here and wait?" I asked in a whisper, half awed by the deep pervading hush. "We will first peep into 1 or 2 other nooks of this nutshell," he replied. "Dare you take the freedom of going all over the house?" I inquired. "Yes, I dare," said he quietly. He led the way. I was shown a little kitchen with a little stove and oven, with few but bright brasses, 2 chairs and a table. A small cupboard held a diminutive but commodious set of earthenware. "There is a coffee service of china in the salon," said M. Paul, as I looked at the 6 green and white dinner plates, the 4 dishes, the cups and jugs to match. Conducted up the narrow but clean staircase, I was permitted a glimpse of 2 pretty cabinets of sleeping rooms. Finally, I was once more led below, and we halted with a certain ceremony before a larger door than had yet been opened. Producing a second key, M. Emanuel adjusted it to the lock of this door. He opened and put me in before him. "Voici!" he cried. I found myself in a good-sized apartment, scrupulously clean, though bare, compared with those I had hitherto seen. The well-scoured boards were carpetless. It contained 2 rows of green benches and desks, with an alley down the centre, terminating in an estrade, a teacher's chair and table. Behind them a tableau. On the walls hung 2 maps. In the windows flowered a few hardy plants. In short, here was a miniature classe. complete, neat, pleasant. "It is a school, then," said I. "Who keeps it? I never heard of an establishment in this faubourg." "Will you have the goodness to accept of a few prospectuses for distribution in behalf of a friend of mine?" asked he, taking from his surtout pocket some quires of these documents, and putting them into my hand. I looked, I read, printed in fair characters: "Externat de Demoiselle, numéro 7, Faubourg Clotilde, directrice, Mademoiselle Lucy Snowe." And what did I say to M. Paul Emanuel? Certain junctures of our lives must always be difficult of recall to memory. Certain points, crises, certain feelings, joys, griefs, and amazements, when reviewed, must strike us as things wildered and whirling, dim as a wheel fast spun. I can no more remember the thoughts or the words of the 10 minutes succeeding this disclosure than I can retrace the experience of my earliest year of life. And yet the first thing distinct to me is the consciousness that I was speaking very fast, repeating over and over again: "Did you do this, M. Paul? Is this your house? Did you furnish it? Did you get these papers printed? Do you mean me? Am I the directress? Is there another Lucy Snowe? Tell me, say something!" But he would not speak. His pleased silence, his laughing down look, his attitude, are visible to me now. "How is it? I must know all, all!" I cried. The packet of papers fell on the floor. He had extended his hand, and I had fastened thereon, oblivious of all else. "Ah, you said I had forgotten you all these weary days," said he. "Poor old Emanuel! These are the thanks he gets for trudging about 3 mortal weeks, from house-painter to upholsterer, from cabinet-maker to charwoman. Lucy and Lucy's cot, the sole thoughts in his head." I hardly knew what to do. I first caressed the soft velvet on his cuff, and then I stroked the hand it surrounded. It was his foresight, his goodness, his silent, strong, effective goodness, that overpowered me by their proved reality. It was the assurance of his sleepless interest which broke on me like a light from heaven. It was his, I will dare to say it, his fond, tender look, which now shook me indescribably. In the midst of all, I forced myself to look at the practical. "The trouble!" I cried, "and the cost! Had you money, M. Paul?" "Plenty of money," said he heartily. "The disposal of my large teaching connection put me in possession of a handsome sum. With part of it I determined to give myself the richest treat that I have known or shall know. I like this. I have reckoned on this hour day and night lately. I would not come near you because I would not forestall it. Reserve is neither my virtue nor my vice. If I had put myself into your power, and you had begun with your questions of look and lip, 'Where have you been, M. Paul? What have you been doing? What is your mystery?' my solitary first and last secret would presently have unravelled itself in your lap. Now," he pursued, "you shall live here and have a school. You shall employ yourself while I am away. You shall think of me sometimes. You shall mind your health and happiness for my sake. And when I come back—" There he left a blank. I promised to do all he told me. I promised to work hard and willingly. "I will be your faithful steward," I said. "I trust at your coming the account will be ready. Monsieur, you are too good." In such inadequate language my feelings struggled for expression. They could not get it. Speech, brittle and unmalleable, and cold as ice, dissolved or shivered in the effort. He watched me, still. He gently raised his hand to stroke my hair. It touched my lips in passing. I pressed it close, I paid it tribute. He was my king. Royal for me had been that hand's bounty. To offer homage was both a joy and a duty. The afternoon hours were over, and the stiller time of evening shaded the quiet faubourg. M. Paul claimed my hospitality. Occupied and afoot since morning, he needed refreshment. He said I should offer him chocolate in my pretty gold and white china service. He went out and ordered what was needful from the restaurant. He placed the small guéridon and 2 chairs in the balcony outside the French window under the screening vines. With what shy joy I accepted my part as hostess, arranged the salver, served the benefactor guest. This balcony was in the rear of the house, the gardens of the faubourg were round us, fields extended beyond. The air was still, mild and fresh. Above the poplars, the laurels, the cypresses and the roses looked up a moon so lovely and so halcyon the heart trembled under her smile. A star shone subject beside her, with the unemulous ray of pure love. In a large garden near us a jet rose from a well, and a pale statue leaned over the play of waters. Monsieur Paul talked to me. His voice was so modulated that it mixed harmonious with the silver whisper, the gush, the musical sigh, in which light breeze, fountain, and foliage intoned their lulling vesper. Happy hour! Stay one moment. Droop those plumes, rest those wings, incline to mine that brow of heaven. White angel, let thy light linger, leave its reflection on succeeding clouds, bequeath its cheer to that time which needs a ray in retrospect. Our meal was simple: the chocolate, the rolls, the plate of fresh summer fruit, cherries and strawberries bedded in green leaves, formed the whole. But it was what we both liked better than a feast, and I took a delight inexpressible in tending Monsieur Paul. I asked him whether his friends Père Silas and Madame Beck knew what he had done, whether they had seen my house. "Mon ami," said he, "none knows what I have done save you and myself. The pleasure is consecrated to us two, unshared and unprofaned. To speak truth, there has been to me in this matter a refinement of enjoyment I would not make vulgar by communication. Besides," smiling, "I wanted to prove to Miss Lucy that I could keep a secret. How often has she taunted me with lack of dignified reserve and needful caution! How many times has she saucily insinuated that all my affairs are the secret of Polichinelle!" This was true enough. I had not spared him on this point, nor perhaps on any other that was assailable. Magnificent-minded, grand-hearted, dear, faulty little man! You deserved candour, and from me always had it. Continuing my queries, I asked to whom the house belonged, who was my landlord, the amount of my rent. He instantly gave me these particulars in writing. He had foreseen and prepared all things. The house was not Monsieur Paul's, that I guessed. He was hardly the man to become a proprietor. I more than suspected in him a lamentable absence of the saving faculty. He could get, but not keep. He needed a treasurer. The tenement, then, belonged to a citizen in the Basse Ville, a man of substance, Monsieur Paul said. He startled me by adding, "A friend of yours, Miss Lucy, a person who has a most respectful regard for you." And to my pleasant surprise, I found the landlord was none other than Monsieur Miret, the short-tempered and kind-hearted bookseller who had so kindly found me a seat that eventful night in the park. It seems Monsieur Miret was, in his station, rich, as well as much respected, and possessed several houses in this faubourg. The rent was moderate, scarce half of what it would have been for a house of equal size nearer the centre of Villette. "And then," observed Monsieur Paul, "should fortune not favour you, though I think she will, I have the satisfaction to think you are in good hands. Monsieur Miret will not be extortionate. The first year's rent you have already in your savings. Afterwards Miss Lucy must trust God and herself. But now, what will you do for pupils?" "I must distribute my prospectuses." "Right! By way of losing no time, I gave one to Monsieur Miret yesterday. Should you object to beginning with 3 petites bourgeoises, the Demoiselles Miret? They are at your service." "Monsieur, you forget nothing. You are wonderful. Object! It would become me indeed to object. I suppose I hardly expect at the outset to number aristocrats in my little day school. I care not if they never come. I shall be proud to receive Monsieur Miret's daughters. Besides these, pursued he, another pupil offers who will come daily to take lessons in English, and as she is rich, she will pay handsomely. I mean my goddaughter and ward, Justine Marie Sauveur. What is in a name? What in 3 words? Till this moment I had listened with living joy, I had answered with gleeful quickness. A name froze me, 3 words struck me mute. The effect could not be hidden, and indeed I scarce tried to hide it. "What now?" said M. Paul. "Nothing." "Nothing! Your countenance changes, your colour and your very eyes fade. Nothing! You must be ill, you have some suffering. Tell me what." I had nothing to tell. He drew his chair nearer. He did not grow vexed, though I continued silent and icy. He tried to win a word. He entreated with perseverance. He waited with patience. "Justine Marie is a good girl," said he, "docile and amiable, not quick, but you will like her." "I think not. I think she must not come here." Such was my speech. "Do you wish to puzzle me? Do you know her? But in truth there is something. Again, you are pale as that statue. Rely on Paul Carlos. Tell him the grief." His chair touched mine. His hand quietly advanced, turned me towards him. "Do you know Marie Justine?" said he again. The name, repronounced by his lips, overcame me unaccountably. It did not prostrate. No, it stirred me up, running with haste and heat through my veins, recalling an hour of quick pain, many days and nights of heart-sickness. Near me as he now sat, strongly and closely as he had long twined his life in mine, far as had progressed, and near as was achieved, our minds' and affections' assimilation, the very suggestion of interference, of heart separation, could be heard only with a fermenting excitement, an impetuous throe, a disdainful resolve, an ire, a resistance of which no human eye or cheek could hide the flame, nor any truth-accustomed human tongue curb the cry. "I want to tell you something," I said. "I want to tell you all." "Speak, Lucy. Come near. Speak. Who prizes you if I do not? Who is your friend if not Emmanuel? Speak." I spoke. All escaped from my lips. I lacked not words now. Fast I narrated. Fluent I told my tale. It streamed on my tongue. I went back to the night in the park. I mentioned the medicated draught, why it was given, its goading effect, how it had torn rest from under my head, shaken me from my couch, carried me abroad with the lure of a vivid yet solemn fancy. A summer night solitude on turf, under trees, near a deep, cool lakelet. I told the scene realized, the crowd, the masks, the music, the lamps, the splendours, the guns booming afar, the bells sounding on high. All I had encountered I detailed. All I had recognized, heard, and seen, how I had beheld and watched himself, how I listened, how much heard, what conjectured, the whole history, in brief, summoned to his confidence, rushed thither, truthful, literal, ardent, bitter. Still as I narrated, instead of checking, he incited me to proceed, he spurred me by the gesture, the smile, the half-word. Before I had half done, he held both my hands, he consulted my eyes with a most piercing glance. There was something in his face which tended neither to calm nor to put me down. He forgot his own doctrine, he forsook his own system of repression when I most challenged its exercise. I think I deserved strong reproof, but when have we our deserts? I merited severity, he looked indulgence. To my very self I seemed imperious and unreasonable, for I forbade Justine Marie my door and roof. He smiled, betraying delight. Warm, jealous, and haughty, I knew not till now that my nature had such a mood. He gathered me near his heart. I was full of faults, he took them and me all home. For the moment of utmost mutiny, he reserved the one deep spell of peace. These words caressed my ear: "Lucy, take my love. One day share my life. Be my dearest, first on earth." We walked back to the Rue Fossette by moonlight, such moonlight as fell on Eden, shining through the shades of the great garden, and haply gilding a path glorious for a step divine, a presence nameless. Once in their lives some men and women go back to these first fresh days of our great sire and mother, taste that grand morning's dew, bathe in its sunrise. In the course of the walk I was told how Justine Marie Sauveur had always been regarded with the affection proper to a daughter; how, with M. Paul's consent, she had been affianced for months to one Heinrich Müller, a wealthy young German merchant, and was to be married in the course of a year. Some of M. Emanuel's relations and connections would, indeed, it seems, have liked him to marry her, with a view to securing her fortune in the family; but to himself the scheme was repugnant, and the idea totally inadmissible. We reached Madame Beck's door. Jean-Baptiste's clock told 9. At this hour, in this house, 18 months since, had this man at my side bent before me, looked into my face and eyes, and arbitered my destiny. This very evening he had again stooped, gazed, and decreed. How different the look, how far otherwise the fate! He deemed me born under his star. He seemed to have spread over me its beam like a banner. Once, unknown and unloved, I held him harsh and strange. The low stature, the wiry make, the angles, the darkness, the manner displeased me. Now, penetrated with his influence, and living by his affection, having his worth by intellect, and his goodness by heart, I preferred him before all humanity. We parted. He gave me his pledge, and then his farewell. We parted. The next day he sailed. End of chapter 41.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, and to find out how you can volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Moira Fogarty. Villette by Charlotte Brontë. Chapter 42. Fini. Man cannot prophesy. Love is no oracle. Fear sometimes imagines a vain thing. Those years of absence! How had I sickened over their anticipation! The woe they must bring seemed certain as death. I knew the nature of their course. I never had doubt how it would harrow as it went. The Juggernaut on his car towered there a grim load. Seeing him draw nigh, burying his broad wheels in the oppressed soil, I, the prostrate votary, felt beforehand the annihilating crunch. Strange to say, strange yet true, and owning many parallels in life's experience, that anticipatory crunch proved all. Yes, nearly all the torture. The great Juggernaut, in his great chariot, drew on lofty, loud, and sullen. He passed quietly, like a shadow sweeping the sky at noon. Nothing but a chilling dimness was seen or felt. I looked up. Chariot and demon charioteer were gone by. The votary still lived. Monsieur Emanuel was away 3 years. Reader, they were the 3 happiest years of my life. Do you scout the paradox? Listen. I commenced my school. I worked hard. I deemed myself the steward of his property, and determined, God willing, to render a good account. Pupils came, burghers at first, a higher class ere long. About the middle of the second year, an unexpected chance threw into my hands an additional £100. One day I received from England a letter containing that sum. It came from Mr. Marchmont, the cousin and heir of my dear and dead mistress. He was just recovering from a dangerous illness. The money was a peace offering to his conscience, reproaching him in the matter of, I know not what, papers or memoranda found after his kinswoman's death, naming or recommending Lucy Snowe. Mrs. Barrett had given him my address. How far his conscience had been sinned against, I never inquired. I asked no questions, but took the cash and made it useful. With this £100 I ventured to take the house adjoining mine. I would not leave that which Monsieur Paul had chosen, in which he had left and where he expected again to find me. My externat became a pensionnat. That also prospered. The secret of my success did not lie so much in myself, in any endowment, any power of mine, as in a new state of circumstances, a wonderfully changed life, a relieved heart. The spring which moved my energies lay far away beyond seas, in an Indian isle. At parting I had been left a legacy, such a thought for the present, such a hope for the future, such a motive for persevering, a laborious, an enterprising, a patient, and a brave course. I could not flag. Few things shook me now. Few things had importance to vex, intimidate, or depress me. Most things pleased. Mere trifles had a charm. Do not think that this genial flame sustained itself, or lived wholly on a bequeathed hope or a parting promise. A generous provider supplied bounteous fuel. I was spared all chill, all stint. I was not suffered to fear penury. I was not tried with suspense. By every vessel he wrote as he gave and as he loved, in full-handed, full-hearted plenitude. He wrote because he liked to write. He did not abridge because he cared not to abridge. He sat down, he took pen and paper because he loved Lucy and had much to say to her, because he was faithful and thoughtful, because he was tender and true. There was no sham and no cheat, and no hollow unreal in him. Apology never dripped her slippery oil on his lips, never preferred by his pen her coward feints and paltry nullities. He would give neither a stone nor an excuse, neither a scorpion nor a disappointment. His letters were real food that nourished, living water that refreshed. And was I grateful? God knows! I believe that scarce a living being so remembered, so sustained, dealt with in kind so constant, honourable, and noble, could be otherwise than grateful to the death. Adherent to his own religion, in him was not the stuff of which is made the facile apostate. He freely left me my pure faith. He did not tease nor tempt. He said, "Remain a Protestant. My little English Puritan, I love Protestantism in you. I own its severe charm. There is something in its ritual I cannot receive myself, but it is the sole creed for Lucy." All Rome could not put him into bigotry, nor the propaganda itself make him a real Jesuit. He was born honest and not false, artless and not cunning, a free man and not a slave. His tenderness had rendered him ductile in a priest's hands. His affection, his devotedness, his sincere pious enthusiasm blinded his kind eyes sometimes, made him abandon justice to himself to do the work of craft, and serve the ends of selfishness. But these are faults so rare to find, so costly to their owner to indulge, we scarce know whether they will not one day be reckoned amongst the jewels. And now the 3 years are past. Monsieur Emanuel's return is fixed. It is autumn. He is to be with me ere the mists of November come. My school flourishes. My house is ready. I have made him a little library, filled its shelves with the books he left in my care. I have cultivated out of love for him, I was naturally no florist, the plants he preferred, and some of them are yet in bloom. I thought I loved him when he went away. I love him now in another degree. He is more my own. The sun passes the equinox. The days shorten, the leaves grow sere, but he is coming. Frosts appear at night. November has sent his fogs in advance. the wind takes its autumn moan, but he is coming. The skies hang full and dark. A wrack sails from the west. The clouds cast themselves into strange forms, arches and broad radiations. There rise resplendent mornings, glorious, royal, purple as monarch in his state. The heavens are one flame. So wild are they rival battle at its thickest. So bloody, they shame victory in her pride. I know some signs of the sky. I have noted them ever since childhood. God, watch that sail! Oh, guard it! The wind shifts to the west. Peace, peace, banshee! Keening at every window. It will rise, it will swell, it shrieks out long. Wander as I may through this house this night, I cannot lull the blast. The advancing hours make it strong. By midnight all sleepless watchers hear and fear a wild south-west storm. That storm roared frenzied for 7 days. It did not cease till the Atlantic was strewn with wrecks. It did not lull till the deeps had gorged their full sustenance. Not till the destroying angel of tempest had achieved his perfect work would he fold the wings whose waft was thunder, the tremor of whose plumes was storm. Peace! Be still! Oh, 1,000 weepers, praying in agony on waiting shores, listened for that voice, but it was not uttered till, when the hush came, some could not feel it, till, when the sun returned, his light was night to some. Here pause at once. There is enough said. Trouble no quiet, kind heart. Leave sunny imaginations hope. Let it be theirs to conceive the delight of joy born again fresh out of great terror, the rapture of rescue from peril, the wondrous reprieve from dread, the fruition of return. Let them picture union and a happy succeeding life. Madame Beck prospered all the days of her life. So did Père Silas. Madame Walravens fulfilled her 90th year before she died. Farewell. End of chapter 42, and end of Villette by Charlotte Brontë.